Hi everyone, Stjepan here. I'm going to continue showing you the games from the Paraćin Open. Since then I've played 3 more tournaments, so I have a lot of games to show you. Sorry for not uploading, but I've been playing chess. And from now on, I'm going to be recording games. I'm going to take a break from playing for about a month after I finish the tournament that starts in 2 days. So after that I'm taking a break and regular uploads for at least a month and a half. Okay, so in round 6 in Paraćin I faced a strong opponent, 2100, about 200 points higher rated than me. And he usually plays the Sicilian, and he usually plays Khan/Taimanov setups. So I sort of knew what to expect. The problem with these positions, at least for me, is that they often reach a point at which I don't know what exactly I should be doing. And I think it's like that for most people. It's usually a position where white has more space, but rarely has ways to utilize it properly. So anyway, let's get into the setup. So c5, knight f3, e6, and I start with c4. I did not expect him to go for the Kramnik main lines with knight c6, etc. He played a6, which is an invitation to the Khan, which I could decline by keeping the pawn structure closed with pawn to d3. But I'm not as familiar with those setups, so I open the position up and we transpose to the main line Khan Sicilian, where white is playing the Maroczy A setup. In this position, it's important to play the move a3. You don't have to, as you're going to see in one of my later games where I purposely did not play it, wanted to enter something different and messed up. But the point is basically that if you do play a normal move, like bishop e3, which you would like to play, then bishop b4 comes and problems on e4, and it's getting a bit hard to defend everything. So a3, a useful prophylactic move. b6 by black, and now we have a Maroczy bind against the Hedgehog. Slightly strange for white to have a pawn on a3, but in the Khan Sicilian that's what you have to do. Bishop e3, bishop to b7, pawn to f3. This is all the main line and has been played a million times. Black could start with d6 or bishop e7. My opponent played bishop e7 first, bishop e2, and now pawn to d6. And here white could go 2 different ways. You could either play castles, and after castles go queen d2, and then play the f rook to c1, or you can go for the setup I went for with rook c1, and the other rook is going to be coming to d1. Okay, so black castles, white castles, and here he played a slightly strange move. Here he played rook c8, which is fine. He's basically using the fact that I didn't put my f rook on c1, and he wants to have a bit more pressure on the queen side. The normal way to play this is knight bd7, and after b4, rook a to c8, to sort of mirror what white is doing. I think this is the more principled way. Castles, so rook c8, queen to d2, knight bd7, b4, queen d8, rook fd1. And now my setup is complete. Black's setup is basically complete. I have to mention this move, queen d8, which it's not that I wasn't familiar with the move, it's that I wasn't familiar with the setup black was going for. So as I said, usually this rook comes to c8, the queen will usually then come to b8. What my opponent did was slightly confusing, but I did manage to find my way around it. So queen d8 played, and I sort of understood the idea behind it, but not really. Okay, rook fd1, rook a to b8, and now knight to a4. Knight a4 is a strange move. In some positions I want to be controlling e5, so I want to transfer my knight to d3. Sometimes I want to overprotect c4, sometimes I want to play b5, excuse me, sometimes I want to play c5. Sometimes if this knight wanders away to e5, as black would like to do in many positions, this guy is hanging. And here he completed his setup with queen f8. Now, at this point, I got slightly scared. He played quickly. This could be connected with a kingside attack. It could be connected with a5, which I was expecting, and then when a trade happens, I have a weakness on a3. If black could ever get in d5, which is not unrealistic, he has 1, 2, 3 defenders. I only have 3 attackers, I only have 2 defenders. So I could find myself in a situation where he basically breaks open the position on the queen side and in the center, puts enough pressure on my b4 or a3 pawn to make me, well, play defensively, which I don't really want to do. So I decided to play a prophylactic move which plays against both of those things. I played king h1, and this firstly plays around a kingside attack in many positions. Secondly, I'm not on this diagonal, which which could be very useful if things blow open. And finally, sometimes I could start an attack of my own, and I wanted to, after he played queen f8, get my knight back into play. I don't really want my knight on a4 now. I wanted to put all of my pieces towards the king side, get my rook to g1, and just start pressuring. I mean, I do have more pieces on the king side, so that's justifiable, I believe. He played h6. Now, h6 I found to be a strange move. I mean, usually people play h5 in similar positions and try to break open my position here, or they leave the h-pawn put and then try to go for f5 to weaken this diagonal, especially with the king on h1. h6 in my mind was connected to g5 and the knight coming around to g6, putting pressure on f4 and h4. But I thought that was weakening. Okay, I played rook g1 here, which maybe I should not have played. I could have started queen e1, and then, let's say he plays a normal move, just queen f1. And I'm trying to do the same thing to him, and just putting pressure on a6. And this was my secondary idea after he played h6, because I wasn't really sure what he does unless he plays a5 at some point. So let's say he plays it here. Now I can just bring my knight back, we trade, and I have greater control over the a file because he has placed his bishop on a8, and maybe I could trade in some squares. Maybe eventually I can get in b5, lock this weakness, put my knight into c6, put my rook on a6. I mean, that's all very far away, but this I think would have been pleasant. But I ended up playing rook g1 as planned. Bishop a8 anyway. I brought my knight back to c3, it's really not doing anything. He put his knight into e5, attacking my pawn, and I brought my knight to d1. I want it on f2, and then possibly on d3, maybe on h3, maybe fighting for the king side like this, and g5. And here I was really happy. I mean, g5 is a weakening move, and by the time he gets his knight into g6 and puts pressure on these squares, I have time to do things of my own. So knight f2, knight g6, and now bishop to d3. Bishop d3 I'm not happy with, I have to say, but I wanted to relieve some of the pressure from the d5 break, and I wanted to give my my knight the e2 square to be able to control f4 some more. I couldn't really see what my knight was doing on d4, and if he ever pushes e5, which I'm not saying is good, I wasn't that sure that I wanted my knight on f5 in the event he starts defending everything, because it's going to get pushed away. So anyway, I wanted to give my knight the e2 square. And as you can see, we are shuffling our pieces like madmen, not really, at least I'm not doing anything regarding my pawn structure. He did play h6, g5, which you could argue is weakening, and maybe he shouldn't have. But had he not done that, I don't see a way for either side to make progress. I could shuffle my rook back here and the other one here, and then start going on the queen side, but I think that would just liquidate. Anyway, he played knight d7, played knight e2, now he played knight d to e5. His knights do look impressive, but now I get in knight g3, and if he wants to take my bad bishop, that's amazing. I mean, I would love him to take my bad bishop. I think knight d3 would basically give me a big advantage. With a clear weakness on d6, with my good bishop remaining, I think I would have been the one playing for the win. He played knight f4, double pressure. This I have to take. And I thought this wasn't possible. And I'm pretty sure it's not possible. I'd analyzed this position extensively, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So takes, pawn takes. Now I have two options. I can play knight h5 or knight e2. In my mind, they were equally good. Let's have a look at knight h5. The reason I didn't play this was f5, and this seemed to be a very good pawn break, where if I take on f4, then bishop g5, and I mean, I can defend, of course. I'd won a pawn, but I wasn't really happy with this getting blown open with this bishop here. Okay, so I didn't want to go in for that. So after gf4, I played knight e2. And he continued knight g6, defending his pawn. Again, I think f5 would have been the more principled move, with a similar idea of if I take, he has all of this pressure on the diagonal. But after knight g6, I got scared anyway. And he hadn't played f5. That means that I'm basically free to do everything I want, maybe even take the pawn, but I didn't take it. So there are a couple of options. If I go knight h3, he can play e5, and I can go g3, and this is just amazing for me. If takes, then knight takes. I have f5, h5, rook on the open file. I can easily play rook g2, rook g1, and this should be just great. If I don't want to do that, I can take the pawn straight away with knight f4. And if he plays knight f4, queen f4, bishop g5, I can play queen g3. He does not win the exchange, so I don't think he plays knight f4. I was afraid of bishop g5. And now pawn to g3, pawn to e5, and knight h3. And now after ef4, gf4, he has to retreat the bishop, I win the knight. And unfortunately, I did not see all of this during the game. I was too afraid to do it, and this would have just given me an amazing position a pawn up. So knight g6 is a clear mistake, after which I can win a pawn by force. It took more tactical understanding than I had during the game to see that and not to be afraid to do that. Unfortunately, I didn't go for that. Instead, I played rook gd1, which is a bad move. Not that it's the losing move or anything, it just doesn't do anything. I wanted to put pressure on d6 and keep preventing d5, keeping this tension around the f-pawn. Of course, if he ever plays e5, now I'm happy. Now I can go knight c3, knight d5, and open up my good bishop if he takes, put pressure on a6. But he played queen g7. And now all of the variations don't really work. Now I cannot take because the knight is not hanging. So I could go knight h3 here, which I was intending to do. But now he plays bishop g5. And if I take on f4, knight f4, knight f4, e5, I would have to go g3. And if ef4, gf4, that's great. I just either win the bishop or win the queen. So that works. But after g3, he can just go king h8. And now I would have to go h4, bishop f4, gf4, maybe queen g3. And I saw this I saw, and I had no idea what was going on. I was afraid that I would be the one getting mated shortly, or at least he has a draw, which I did not want to go for. So I just played knight g1, releasing the pressure on f4, and I wanted to get my knight into h3 and keep the tension. Okay, he played rook d8, which, same as my move, rook gd1 doesn't really do much. I played knight f2 h3, maybe giving myself the option to put this one on e2. At this point, I think we are both low on time, and I didn't use my opportunity to win the pawn, so now I'm basically not going to get it anymore. Queen e5 played, bishop f1, pressure on d6. Bishop f6, fine. knight e2. Now I am posing a question to the pawn, and he played queen b2 and offered the draw. I had about, I'm gonna say 10-15 minutes left, I'm not really sure anymore, and I accepted. I knew I was slightly better. I didn't know how much better, and I definitely didn't want to risk being worse. I was doing well in the tournament, and he is 200 points higher rated. I could mess this up even if I do win a pawn, so I accepted, which was a cowardly decision. I wouldn't repeat. If I had the same opportunity again, I would have declined. So queen b2 offers a queen trade, obviously. If I take it, I'm worse because my a3 pawn is falling. So I have two options. I can basically take on f4, or I can play rook c2. If I play rook c2, I should be much better, especially if he takes on a3. He basically has to go back. And if he has to go back, then I win a pawn. If he takes on a3, then knight ef4. Perfect. I mean, knight f4, bishop g5, I just go h4. And that's great. And if bishop f4, queen takes, this is winning. This is simply winning for white. His king is far too unsafe to make this holdable, not to mention that my only weakness is defended. I can easily triple up on this guy and just win it. Yeah, alternatively, after queen b2, I can just go knight e4 straight away. Obviously, bishop g5 not possible straight away because knight g5. So let's say queen d2, which makes sense, or bishop g5 not possible because of queen b2. So rook takes d2. My close trier might fall down. Okay, knight f4, bishop g5, g3. If he plays e5, I just go h4 and pawn up. I don't see what's wrong with this position. So yeah, in hindsight, accepting the draw offer was a cowardly decision, which I should not have made. But yeah, playing a tournament game for 3-4 hours, being very close to time trouble against a high-rated opponent, yeah, I accepted. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you got something from this game. I'll continue with round 7 tomorrow. And yeah, stay tuned for more chess. Thanks, bye.